You're listening to Cottontail's podcast, part of the Silicon Valley Black Project, which produced the documentary film A Place at the Table about the Black pioneers of Silicon Valley. A Place at the Table can be viewed for rent on Vimeo.com on demand /A Place at the Table STEM. Through Cottontail's podcast, the Silicon Valley Black Project will continue to recognize the contributions made by African Americans. We will be featuring African American professionals, technologists in the fields of engineering, administration, and entrepreneurial pursuits from the past and present. Today, we're talking to Cherrie Legend, founder of Juneteenth, a social media consulting company establishing social media platforms and branding for small businesses. Cherrie is striking out on her own after working for Apple Computer for 7 years. Juneteenth, that's interesting to me. What's that about?
So Juneteenth, I guess my background, I'm originally from Texas, from Dallas. So
Okay.
we actually celebrated Juneteenth, just because, every year. And so then when I got out here to California, people are like, I've never heard of that. Or, they're treating it like, Kwanzaa part two. And it's like, that's not really the meaning of that holiday, but at least you know about it.
Yeah.
And then, really started gaining traction, especially last year, because I just remember when I first went to Apple. One thing I started realizing at Apple, a lot of the Black people who worked there were of Caribbean or African descent. So the U.S. culture things didn't get a lot of uplift because that wasn't anyone's background, even in the Black affinity groups.
Mhm.
And so, one year we were like, oh, we want to do Juneteenth, and they were like, oh no, it's not gonna, we'll never get approval or whatever. I'm like, fine then, we're just gonna have a potluck and set it up and just make it happen. And we did that, and it was too funny because I guess one of the security guards that came to investigate was this Black woman, and I was like, well, we know we're good, because she was just like, oh really, and had a plate. So it was like, well, if she's in charge of checking us out, well, we already know that this is gonna get well. What Juneteenth does is social media, consulting and storytelling, because there's a lot of social media stories that they just need the infrastructure, and that would uplift the story. But then when I started kind of working on it last year, I was like, oh, I'm going to do small businesses and stuff. But then I started realizing small businesses don't really have their own business plan together. So then it's hard to say, what is your social media strategy, when it's like, what is your business plan? Or what do you I need to know what your core. So it was I spent more time helping people with their business plans. You can't get to social if you don't have a business plan, that type of thing. So then I was like, all right, let me go back to enterprise and stuff. And then what I can do is for influencers and creators, I can help them talk to these enterprise level, because that's equally as important, of getting that access. And now knowing that if that's your full-time job, you're getting compensated for it, and you know what to look for, and you know how to negotiate contracts with these brands. Because I was sitting on the other side of the table and basically being like, do better. This is not just kind of wink and a nod of don't accept anything less than this. You don't want to, you're getting played here, that type of thing. So that's sort of one way I felt okay, now this is uplifting new communities, but also giving them access to all of this money and capital. Recently, I also got into this incubator program sponsored by Visa to help with businesses. So it's Visa and this other program called Bridge for Billions. Because I was showing them here's an org chart for where social media should go, and they're like, what? Social media needs an org chart? It's not just one person. I'm like, exactly. On an enterprise level, it shouldn't be one person, because that one person also has the password. You would never let one person run your sales team in an enterprise, but yet you do that with something that's arguably more visible than anything else in your company.
Yeah. No, I think I think people think that whatever social media they're in, that's
Yeah.
it. Like Facebook, that's all there is.
Hmm.
They don't realize that when they go on that line online, it's global. People that you don't know in Russia, in
Yeah.
England, who can see everything you're doing. So they just don't.
No, it's funny because the Bridge for Billions program is based out of Spain. And one of the women I was talking to, she was originally from London and moved to Madrid before Brexit took effect. And like, she was like, yeah, I was out. Once I knew this was coming, so I left. And then she was like, I was like saying, yeah, it's about Juneteenth and Juneteenth. And she's like, oh no, I've heard of Juneteenth. And I'm like, what? So I'm like, wow, it's international. So then I was like, oh gosh, I better go trademark company if it's getting international.
Right.
Because when I had the name, it was obscure. Nobody was looking it up. Now it's like, yeah, I'm guaranteed. Like my website has to be like up to date because I get a lot of traffic on Juneteenth just because of that now, and it's like incredible to see how big of a turnaround that's been.
That's good. Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Lucky break, huh?
Yeah, like it was just a weird break. I'm like, I mean, I was doing it just to honor where I came from, and then I did the and because there's so many places like the quill and pen and blah blah blah. So I was like, fine, June and Teenth. I can play with tech like that too. And like that's where I was coming from, not this here's a racial reckoning for the world. And like I did not mean to be in the forefront of that.
Let's roll back a bit and you tell me your friends, your family, what was your motivation going to college? How did you get into this media stuff?
So about me, I'm yeah, originally from Dallas, single parent mom. I mean, the middle school I went to was a magnet school, so they only accepted 100 people from across the district into the school. Dallas magnet schools were very interesting because when I was there, they were actually part of a desegregation order. So because of that, they had to match whatever the national statistics were at the time. And so that meant in a class of 100, 12 Black students, which is funny now because when people are always like, it's not diverse. And I'm like, I don't know if you've looked at statistics of the US. That whole word minority, we really are. So when you're saying, oh, I don't see enough Black people, you're never going to see 50%. If anything, you're not seeing enough Hispanic people in your office. Like that's the closer to every other person should be like someone Hispanic. But I guess since I went to school like that, my reality has always, I know exactly what it should look like. So every time I'm in a building, I'm like, okay, there's about 100 people in here. I saw 12 people. I saw 8. Cool. Like I'm good. Like, cause I know that's really, and then on top of that, it's like, okay, are you in Atlanta? Are you in Detroit? Are you in a place where we're like concentrated? Cause then you're like, I don't see 50% Black people in the Bay Area. And I'm like, well, Mountain View was 1% or 2. I think it's 2%. I found that out because of the COVID numbers. And it's like, yeah, it's like 2%. Like the funny thing is the building I live in, it has 128 units. I think we count it one day. I think there's like 7 Black people. It's like, that's actually approaching a representative sample. I'm like, so people are complaining like, oh, we don't exist. And it's like,
yes, you do.
you actually do. We actually are here. I did magnet school from 4th grade to 8th grade, and then in high school, I was like, no, I want to do just a quote unquote normal school or community school is what they would call it. That was the euphemism. And so I went to the normal high school. And then after a year, I was like, I hate it here. Let me go to the corresponding magnet school. Got into the corresponding high school magnet school, but then I met a boy, and then I was like, maybe this isn't that bad. Yeah, so I ended up going to like WT White, which from there I went to Stanford. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I think I spent a lot of time of how did I get into Stanford, and like some of my other friends didn't. My school was a feeder school for UT, so it said Longhorns, but other than that, it wasn't really like no one went to the big schools. But my year, I went to Stanford, and I had there was a Latina woman who went to Princeton, and that was like huge that year. Did both undergrad and grad in sociology. When I graduated, it's like 2009, and so like that's the heart of recession. So I'm like, well, I'll just stay an extra year, and I mean, I guess pay for Stanford out of pocket for a year and just like get this education. So I did that. And then my friend, Corey, he worked at Apple. He did all the interning and all of that work. I say he did all the legwork for me. So then I could just like, and I moved in as his roommate, but I didn't have a job yet. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna need for you to get a job. And there was a job opening at Apple. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna get Apple, so I'll just go there and have fun. And then they called me back and they're like, oh yeah, you got it. So I was like, as a contractor, I was like, yes. So and apparently I didn't realize this until after the fact that job was only supposed to last 3 months, but then they liked me, so they moved me into something else. So the conversation that would have been, oh, we're sorry, that's the end of this contract was, oh, we're moving you into something else.
You get to Stanford, you get to Apple. You know what, Cherry? It's almost like you lived a charmed life.
Yeah, it seems like that. I mean, no, it's like it's crazy because I feel like I've always been in situations where something I've done in the past led me to do something in the future. It's like something obscure that I learned, like I was in Girl Scouts as a kid and stuff like that, or horseback riding. Then all of a sudden, like flash forward, at Stanford, it's like, oh yeah, that's that random ass skill or random skill you need to know, and you can blend in. Texas middle classes, you're fine in Texas, but if you move that anywhere else, like you're poor. And I did not realize that until I went to Stanford, and people are like really, really wealthy and it's good. And like in hindsight too, I know I was like really fought for because like they were like, oh, we need like an extra writing sample and stuff like that. And the writing sample, I remember what I sent. I was like, I got bored in English class. I was like, we had a thing about you should write about pro or con. Should there be a Confederate History Month? And I was literally bored. So I'm like, you know what? Fine, then I'll write for it just so I can just see how this is, like, just so I can like try to make an argument because it's gonna be everyone's gonna say against. So why don't I just write for it? And
Check that up. You check that box. Did she say who she was and what?
so my mom made sure that I had access to all these opportunities. Like, and she would fight for opportunities. Like, cause I remember like even in kindergarten, when I went to kindergarten, I could read. I was bored because I could read and I talk a lot. I still talk a lot. And so I'm just like, so I'm literally like, and the cow jumped and moved. Okay, what's the next part of the story? But now I look like belligerent little kid. And so, I'm telling, like, I'm getting in trouble. And my mom is like talking to the teacher, and the teacher's like, well, maybe since she comes from a single parent home, maybe I should report you for like child neglect since she's acting out. What? And then yeah, his mom was like, and after that, I removed you. And it was interesting because I started talking to especially a lot of men who went to Stanford. You'd be amazed at how many guys around my era were in special ed.
Oh no, I wouldn't. Oh no, I
Yeah,
wouldn't.
they were all
Yeah, black males, yes.
yes.
So yes, I do understand what happens to black males.
Up until third grade, I was in quote unquote the community program, but I just remember one time again, this whole like not only could I read, I always could read however many grade levels up. So like second grade was like seventh grade and so forth. Because I like not only did I outread this one kid, I like corrected him. I was like, yeah, it's this word. And so like that kid felt really embarrassed being like outread by like a second grader. So she was like, yeah, that class, like they were really motivated that year. But in the same breath, like a year or two before that, she was like, oh, I can't wait till you get to fourth grade because you're over here talking and like I'm gonna, basically punish you really hard for speaking out and stuff. And I was one of those wise kids where like if someone's like, oh, you have a smart mouth, I'd be like, well, better than a dumb one, right? Like, I would come back with that type of retort. And so they're just like, oh, like,
Who's this
so
little monster?
talking to someone, I was like, when black people talk about code switching, they're talking about, oh, I'm code switching into black and white, but what they're actually code switching is black to American Standard English. Because there's a whole different white code switch that a lot of black people cannot do.
Tell me then, what media marketing? What would how would you
Yeah,
describe that?
so like, well, social media marketing, well, there's two ways. There is for creators and then for business, right? And so for creators, it's hey, here I am as a persona. I'm now me, myself, I'm a brand. Versus as a brand or a company or organization, it's you're trying to generate sales, get leads, have like brand acknowledgement and appreciation, or your help. So like help would be like someone at Twitter saying, "Oh, at Target, this product really sucks," and then someone responds from Target help team saying, "Oh, how can we help you? We've opened a case number," that type of thing. And the thing about that type of marketing for businesses is people think like, "Oh my gosh, this major business," because they have a lot of brand recognition, so they tend to get a lot of followers just because of that. You think the background is like shiny, like, oh my gosh, it's this well-oiled machine. In reality, it's just like a fire every single day, like just one fire to the next, trying to post things. If the teams are so small and lean that like if one person leaves, they might have the passwords for like these major brands and like could go in. Like if I'm malicious, like you could go in there and like lock people out and totally just rip out everything. And he's like, you would never do that for any of your, like, you would never have a sales team where one person is the only person in charge of all of your sales. But yet that's what you're doing with social media. And so because their processes are so bad, we can't even get to the part about like, what type of storytelling are you telling? Right, and how who's in the room or who needs to be in the room. Like, so the latest victim of it was Burger King. So they had a ad where on International Women's Day where it was supposed to be this spin of women belong in the kitchen, but what they meant by it was as chefs. They meant like women are underrepresented as chefs. Culinary leadership is what they meant.
Right.
But and I'm sure what happened was when they pitched it, they were like, "Huh?" And then like they were like, "No," but like it was probably white men. We're like, "No, but this is how we're gonna flip it on its head and do this and blah blah blah." Like knowing the agencies they work with. Yes, there were women in the room, but they weren't like again, the higher up you get to like the decision makers and sign offs, they're not there, or they're not there in a way where they can say like, "Hey, maybe we shouldn't do this." Because I remember one time I was at Apple and they were like, "We should have this walkthrough with Zane Lowe, like for beats music, Zane Lowe and Justin Timberlake." And so like two white men, they should walk through the streets of Detroit and talk about the significance of Motown. And I was like, being the only black person in one of the room, like, y'all sure y'all want to do that? Like, you want two white men talking about Detroit, doing this. And then they were like, "Oh, that's a good point." And I'm like, "But if I wasn't in this room, then like by the time it gets to sign off, that's not when you're asking those questions. It's literally like, here's the finished product, let's sign it off." And so that's what's happening behind the scenes. How do we get to women belong in the kitchen and nobody along the way saw that that could potentially be a problem even with your context? Because it's like, yeah, how many people are seeing your context? You could have had the same wording: women make up less than this and they belong in this and this is why, but highlighted the words that say women belong in the kitchen but had all the context around it, because that's the only way you could have gotten away with that. But just writing out that comment and no context, that's where it drew so much fire. But there's not a lot of people who have the level of expertise I have, period, from a corporate standpoint. So that's only a small handful of people. And then most of them certainly are not black or women and or both. So I just happen to have been in a really niche place at a moment that it's really starting to grow.
This social media platform that you're on, and you are one of the few African American women in the fields, what I'm hearing.
Yeah, or black, either way, black or women, because it's just a small field in that sense. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
black or women and black women, like all three.
but don't you find? Of course, this is me talking only because I'm out there a lot, just looking at other people's stuff. But I have found that when African Americans involve themselves in that social media platforms, they seem to really know what they want to do. They seem to utilize the whatever assets are available to. They utilize them quite well, and they
Yeah.
seem to be able to enter into homes and areas where no one else thought to go. And
Well,
they
the
know.
culture, like black culture is internet culture. Like everything, like it's basically people who are like, and the funny thing is like they're shut out of the traditional mechanisms where they could add this voice and input And so they're finding new and creative ways to build all of this stuff, and then it takes off. But the problem is they are the consumers of it. They're not the creators. So I just remember succinctly telling my nephew, because that's pretty much what he used to be. So I was telling him that when he was like really little, like when he was like 12 or 13, and he's like playing all these games on the phone and stuff. I'm like, did you know someone has to make those games? Someone has to design that? And he's like, what? And so, and then on top of that, I started over the years, like the first time I went to VidCon, I was texting him like, "Who is this?" And he's like, "Well, that's such and such, duh. That's this person, duh." And so then the next year, like even YouTube knew about that. They're like, "Yeah, bring your teenager." It was like Teen Fest on the first floor, creators on the second, and then industry on the third. And so like I started inviting him, and like, I flew him out to LA, would meet him and stuff. And like it was so cute because when I worked at Apple, they would like if you flew enough, they would start giving you things like here's your first class pass or companion pass. So he's like 15, 16 flying first class, and that's like his first flight. And I'm like, I want to make this very clear. This can be your normal, but this is not normal. He's been able to adapt, and like he's even impressed like the executives, because like for instance, they're always trying to say, oh, Apple can be your phone, or like your iPad can be your computer for everything. But then they didn't actually use it that way. But then when you're a teenager or someone in his shoes, that literally is all the technology you have. And so he was finding these workarounds and developing this content where he would splice these videos of like a video game he was playing and basically make movie trailers where he would play all of the video games to recreate famous movie trailers, but in the style of game. But he did it all on his phone.
Wow.
And so at first, when people were watching it, like I was showing my coworkers, they're like, "Oh, this is okay." And I'm like, "What if I told you he made that completely on his phone?" They're like, "No, how?" And it's like because that's all you had access to. And so now he's in college and he's doing photography and things like that. Even though it's funny because his generation is obsessed with early to mid 90s photography and like VHS and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, I guess that's his great grandparents. I'm like, my grandparents did all of that stuff. That he's like, they literally have like thrift stores that have like a TV with the VHS like at the bottom of it. And he's like, oh, that's just so cool. And I'm like, what? Once I was teaching like my cousin of like, yeah, you can be the creator and not the consumer. Like he's really taken that to heart, and even it's driven like what his major is and like his photography skills that he's gotten into, and like now he's like a professional photographer and stuff.
So he's in college now then.
He's in college now.
Good for him. Good for him.
Yeah.
But he's so typical of so many bright young people that I've come across that are using the media in such creative ways that I never would have thought of. And that the business of making a movie on an iPhone is.
I have a camera, like I have like it can shoot in 4K, but it's like a Canon EOS. Like it's a mid range, right? And the funny thing was, I intentionally got that creative camera to make YouTube videos. So I was like, the funny thing about YouTube videos is the production value can't be too high.
Yeah, because sometimes if it's too sharp, it doesn't look it looks too real or something. It doesn't look
exactly. So
commercial.
it's back to looking fake because it looks way too real.
Right. It looks too
oh, it's like,
I think that's what happened when so we bring it down to 720p and we're kind of happy.
That's just enough where it's like, okay, it's sharp, but it's not like, wow, whoa, wait a minute.
So what made you leave Apple and go out on your own?
During my time at Apple, I was also like a person who spoke out about things. So the first time was like maybe about 2 years in, and we had this Christmas party, and the leadership decided that, oh, for this Christmas party, they'll recap the year in a song. And like apparently that was their thing, of recapping the year in a song. However, that particular year, they thought they'd use a gospel choir. And at the time, there was more Black people in that gospel choir than there were like in the department. And so it was like just like the Oakland gospel choir, which is also quite a diverse gospel choir, mind you. It's not like they're even like 100% Black, but anyway, so they're singing this parody song, and I'm like, this doesn't feel so like I don't feel right about that. And so I like turned to my friend, the one who helped me get in. I'm like, am I being too Malcolm about this? Where am I supposed to be? He's like, no, I felt some type of way. I'm like, fine then. I will I will address this with the like and I with the leadership. And I knew like so also at the time when I first was at Apple, me, him, and I think two other people, we were the only millennials, quote unquote, in the building. That was it. And so there was all these stereotypes that went along with it. I'm gonna lean into it because I know I can get away with it. Because it's like, and I'll just pretend like I didn't know any better. It's like I know good and well I should have brought it up with my manager who would have killed it and it wouldn't have gotten very far. But I'm like, no, I'm just gonna go directly to the leadership and complain. Well, first I went to HR, and then HR, it was like she was like, well, maybe give me your background. I'm like, give me my background of what? Here's menstrual read. Here's the history of this, and that like shut her up. And then, but then from there, I met with him, and he gave me an hour of time, and it was like,
Now,
okay,
when you say him, who you're talking?
I'm the leadership of the department.
Oh, the department.
It's like I'm an hour with him, and like he's the type of person where he only got 15 minutes of his time. So for me to get an hour, I'm like, this is great. This is 15 minutes to say hire more Black people, 45 minutes for me to talk about whatever I want. And so that's when I started talking about like, oh, my interest in social media and all of that. And then I was talking about, yeah, I mean, because I'm working, I can't be on social media as long, but otherwise I feel I'm there like 4 or 5 hours. He's like, how? And so I wrote this whole report about like the state of social media and sent it to him. And that like made the rounds with senior leadership. And so now he's advocating for like the social media team didn't exist yet, mind you. So once it existed and they hired, they're now like the lead of the department's like, she should be on this team. So who's gonna say no to that?
Yeah.
So I get on the team and I'm working on like well, YouTube didn't even exist yet. So I'm working on influencer stuff. Then the FCC comes down and they're like, oh, do you want to do YouTube or the influencer? I'm like, well, I'll do YouTube. Nobody else is doing it. And so that kind of grew into its own thing. And also during that time, I wrote a letter. There was the Pulse nightclub shooting, and Tim Cook, gay man, he spoke out about that on his Twitter. Well, the shootings of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, he was silent. And then like a few days later, there was also like the incident in Dallas with some police officers, and he was like just some like empty platitudes. So I basically called him out. I wrote a letter to him. This isn't gonna work. I still have the letter, but so like I wrote this letter to him and I CC'd everyone and I checked my bank account before I sent it. I was like, well, this is my last day. Let me. Did I pay off my student loans? Good. Okay, cool. So now that my student loans have been paid off, let me send this letter. At the time it was called African American Employee Association. There was kind of a generational divide there because like when I sent the letter to the group, I was like, hey, does anyone want to proofread this? And then the guys like sending me a side email. We really think this should come from an individual and not really from us as a team. Yet when the African American Employee Association was invited to a meeting with Tim Cook, they were the first ones smiling and like, yeah, this is great, and we're happy to have this talk and stuff, And so that was like the first meeting I had with Tim Cook. So like I had this thing about that was really kind of where the inclusion and diversity came out of. So in some ways, I started a whole department over this, and which in turn started like now everybody has an inclusion and diversity, and I recognized that. I was like, okay, I can either be the person who protests outside, or I can be the person who can email Tim Cook and he actually listens to me and get a blank check. And whatever he says is now policy at Apple trickles across all of the top tech, which now trickles across all of now there's like small or mid-sized companies saying we have a diversity leader. So which one's more impactful? And so that's kind of where I saw myself in the schema of things. So what happened was, so I'm getting all this clout. I'm meeting I'm like friends with a lot of the VPs, Lisa Jackson, then Christy was like, yeah, let me know if I need to use my voice as a white woman in rooms that I know people can't get to, or if I just need to shut up and write a check. And I'm like, we're so busy talking about what we don't have that I don't think anyone's really given any serious thought of, okay, you have the check, you have the seat at the table, what do you want? Because when I was looking up research on that, it was like a blank search result. But all of it was pointing to, well, we don't get this opportunity. It's like, but let's just say we did. What should we be asking for if we did? And so like that's one thing I started learning of, like, you can't keep asking for a seat at the table and you don't have a plate, you don't have a fork, you don't even, you're like, I want the seat at the table. Okay, here's your seat and here's your plate and everything. And it's like, am I supposed to ask for food? It's like, you were complaining this whole time. So that was one like lesson I learned with that. And I also learned that, like, Tim Cook means well, but he's also beholden to stakeholders and he's beholden to legacy, where quite frankly, like Steve Jobs' legacy was, we just make the product. This diversity stuff doesn't matter to me. It matters now because they're more of a global company than they were when he was there. But for him and like the legacy that of leadership that he left behind, they're like, we never had to think about this and we're printing money. And so now that those times are changing, it's like, how do you balance all of that?
There's another story. Frank Green. I don't know if you heard of that name, but he was quite a. He was an inventor and a technologist, and he's well respected in the valley. But anyway, long story short, when he was going to school at the HBCU, they were protesting and going to the lunch counters, and they would sit there and they wouldn't be waited on for hours and hours. They just sit and no one would wait on them. And so one night they went to this one restaurant and they sat down at the table with their, and they're waiting to be waited on. And the waitress came over and said, "Okay, so what do you fellows want? And what would you like to order?" And they're like, "Well, they didn't have any money. They couldn't pay for the food." so, so his after telling that story, he says, it's one thing to protest, but it's a whole nother thing if you're not prepared when you finally get there. And that's kind of the story you're telling. Once you get there and you get the place at the table, and by the way, my documentary is called "A Place at the Table." So you get if you're not there, and when you get there, you better have a plan. And
So I'm building that type of clout in Apple, and now, but back to my day job in social. So the social side, the original director, they replaced him with someone on top of him and moved him down the role. Well, the person they replaced him with really wasn't qualified. Like, he was young and white and basically got there, but now he's feeling threatened because I'm all like, I'm ready to help, and here's my thing, and like, and he doesn't see me and him, he just sees me as a threat. Because I was reporting to him directly. He hired, or no, he didn't hire, like the woman who I helped hire, he put her over me as a manager right before she went on maternity leave. What part of, I'm literally trying to help you, I know you're new, and I'm only trying to help you in the context and stuff of my job.
yeah,
Like, I'm not over here saying, well, maybe you should run the social team like this. I'm literally saying, you said you have a deadline that is YouTube related. I work on YouTube all day, every day, and I know the people you're talking to. What part of this is overstepping my bounds?
right. So, but no, but what they're hearing is you're bragging. You're saying, "I know more than you, and I'm smarter than you," and that's not what you're saying at all. And I'm trying.
No.
Well, that's what black folks have to know going into a situation like that. You know how they think, and you know if there are filters there, so you have to work through it. But so
that's where the split was. It was like I was doing better than ever.
Yeah.
On the, like, literally, I was poised to be the next co-chair of Black and Apple, like in the bag. That was what I was doing.
Okay.
And then meanwhile, my day-to-day job like hated my guts, and they're like, "You're not doing anything." And yet when I left, they had to backfill me with 3 full-time roles.
They don't believe the content. I mean, the amount of work that we get done for them. I mean, can get done. They just can't believe that.
Well, and you know what? Also, it did not help, like the whole black don't crack thing. There were times where my intern looked older than me. In my first 4 or 5 years at Apple, like, so I'm only there 7, 8 years. Literally, the first 5 years, every summer was, "Welcome to Apple. Oh my gosh, you're an intern." Like, I was like the old young person. Like, I'm like, also, I literally have more tenure than 70% of this office. Trying to level with that too, of like looking too young.
Well, now, when you left Apple, did you start your company right away? And if so,
I officially kind of launched it February of last year, and then I got like this office space where I was like, oh, I'll do videos and stuff like. Then of course everything like fell apart, and like I had a client too where I was like, and she was a wedding videographer, so you know how that went, where
Oh,
like
yeah.
all of her business went away overnight. And then now, like, but during like November, December, I was like, okay, let me kind of reset my business plan, rewrote it, and then like I saw the opportunity for the incubator because normally that program I think is like $1,000 or $2,000, but I was like, oh, Visa's sponsoring it, and like I call it black belt money right now. There's a lot of it going around, so I'm like, yes, please, I will take it. I have no guilt in taking your guilty money, like, because there was some. That's the other thing I noticed. Like, black people will be like, "You never give us an opportunity. You get the opportunity." Well, I don't like that this opportunity is only because I'm black. Because if you don't feel good and you didn't take it, I'll take it and I'll feel great. Like I will feel great taking this opportunity and 1,000 here, 5,000 there, and my business has very low overhead. So I'm like, I just need like 2 or 3 guilt grants, and I've covered my year's expense, and now everything else is profit.
Yes.
So I'm okay with living like that. Like I don't understand people's aversion to this. So like that's kind of where I'm at. And then now I'm really mad that I did not, like, ironically, me working in social, I did not promote myself in social. Because it's true, I'm like starting a whole department at Apple for inclusion and diversity. You know, that letter that I wrote to Tim, like, it still is going around to this day. And I'm like, okay, first off, someone else can write a letter, but see, nobody wants to risk their livelihood or anything like that. And you have people cheering you on, like, oh my God, keep breaking through the walls and the glass ceiling. And I'm like, but y'all are literally on the top floor of the ceiling looking down saying, keep going, keep breaking. It's like I'm fine with using the elevator too, you know. Like going through glass is not my preferred method of transportation of like growth in my career when there's an elevator and there's a door and there's all these other mechanisms of getting there. Like I don't mind taking the stairs, like breaking through glass is really inefficient. You know?
Right.
So like
You could invite me up to the party, okay? And
you could invite like instead of just cheering me on from up at the party, you could just invite me there. That's an option we're not discussing.
you're saying actually saying you can give me some legitimacy by inviting me to the party, and once I'm there, then whatever ideas we come up with is a shared reward for everyone. We all have added value because of my presence here. It's just like most of affirmative action, and it started off in the right way, but then what folks saw that were in power is that, wait a minute, they're bringing in very bright people who are more than capable of doing our job. And so here
Yeah.
we bring this young person in from Howard, and they're brilliant. They feel they're going to move up, so we get them in. The numbers look great on paper, but the numbers don't move. They stay right there. It's stagnant. There's no accountability for those numbers. The only
No.
accountability is to report it to the government. But as far as succession
Yes.
plans within the company or moving this person through the ranks because of their talent and whatever, that goes out the window. And so the diversity officer
Yeah.
is sitting there with these great ideas and nowhere to go because no one really wants to listen to or give up what they think is their power. They feel threatened by them instead of wanting to help.
And that's exactly what I mean. I literally had performance reviews where the only negative feedback was she doesn't look busy enough. Wait, so because I even asked her, I was like, so you're saying like not I missed the deadline, I didn't do something, whatever. No, I don't look busy enough. So then I was like, you mean I have to like finish my stuff really early and then just like send it in chunks so it looks like I'm working or working harder or like get to the wire or something like that. So I honestly can say I did not get any constructive feedback until I started joining like this visa program. You know, so like the fact that I never got any real feedback. So, but then it was you're not good enough to be a manager, but we can't tell you why. hmm
So how long have you been in business for yourself?
So now I guess this is like I guess officially it's been a little over a year, but like a year and a half.
Okay. So, and I understand Maynard Holiday was one of your first clients?
Yes, he was one of my first clients. That's when I was like still trying to figure out like the small business and just kind of figure out like what I was doing or not doing because like I helped him like design a website and stuff. And then I realized, oh, my website design skills are like I have the skills, but I'm not a designer. I mean, here's the code and I can do this, but yeah, it's not fast as it should be. Like I only can take on like two clients at a time if I'm doing that type of work because I don't have the designer eye to just go through and just say here, boom, boom, boom.
But it's a pretty nifty website. I went through it. It looks good. You did good work. Has business picked up at all? I mean, how's it going with this COVID nonsense?
I'm trying to work on getting enterprise people. Like that's my new, which it's funny because I was telling my who's now my director. I was like telling her I was like, look, we just need the Apple contractor money. That's the best of all worlds where you're not tied to the launches. They keep calling you back and you just do like this one little task ad nauseum, but you have like a $50,000-$60,000 contract for like 2 months worth of work. Like
Yeah.
that's all we need. That's what we're going for.
Right. Now, how many people do you have working for you so far? Is it just you?
Just one. She just started.
If you had a title, what would you call yourself?
Yeah, no. Well, I call myself like founder of Juneteenth, but like principal social media strategist. So social media strategist, social media expert.
All right.
All
and
of that.
If someone wanted to find you, where would they go?
Juneteenth.com. So June and Teenth. Dot com.
Okay.
And or my Instagram, which is at June and Teenth.
Okay. How about Facebook? Are you on that or Instagram?
On Facebook as well.
June and
yeah,
Teenth.
Facebook and Instagram, June and Teenth. LinkedIn as well. Like that's another place where I find a lot of people. So.
Well, Cherrie, it has been a pleasure to meet you and talk with you. Thank you, Cherrie, for sharing your life with us. Your energy is boundless, and your upbeat outlook of the world made it a pleasure to talk with you. JuneandTeenth.com can be found online. June and Teenth has joined the Visa Entrepreneurship Incubator Program to assist entrepreneurs and businesses in planning their social media presence. I wish you all the success in your social media company and all of your new endeavors. Thank you, Cherrie Legend, and thank you for listening.